All right, guys, today in front of me, we have the Maryland Heritage Series. So we have 3 samples that represented the 3 Maryland Rye whiskeys in the Maryland Heritage Series. We have the Sherbrook Straight Rye Whiskey, the Sherwood Straight Rye Whiskey, and the Mount Vernon Straight Rye Whiskey. Before we get into the review, I do want to send a big thank you over to Christopher David, who supplied me with these samples here to review on the channel. So Christopher, thank you. It is very much appreciated. So what many people don't know is Maryland, along with Pennsylvania and Kentucky, led the nation in the production of distilled spirits, and Maryland Rye was imitated and sought after throughout the entire country. Unfortunately, after Prohibition, the Maryland whiskey industry never fully recovered, and the last distillery closed its doors in 1972. Definitely excited to see what this Maryland Heritage Series is all about, guys. So without further ado, let's go. So we're going to get started with the Sherwood Straight Rye Whiskey. This one comes in at 110.4 proof. Is a 14-year MGP, 95% rye, 5% malted barley. Let's go ahead and get into the nose. So on the nose on this one, there's a lot of rye spice. There's, again, a lot of fruitiness. There's a lot of orange. There's a lot of lemon going on. And then further back into it, I do start to pick up like a little hint of like some sweet oak, a little bit of char. This one actually is slightly minty. A little bit further into the glass, and that's kind of when you start to pick up some of that char, some of that sweet oak that's in there too. Again, this is aged for 14 years, so there's definitely some age on this one. Slight little hint of like some brown sugar and a little bit of toffee, but it definitely hits more on some of those earthy notes and some of those darker characters, especially further into the glass. Most importantly, let's get into the palate. Cheers. So, first thing that I get on the palate on this one, it is very sweet. Some underlying fruity notes on this one. And I actually do pick up like a little hint of almost like a Werther's there on the center of the palate, mixed in with some of those rye spices. Not the graininess, but the spice. And then in the back, you do pick up some of that sweet oak. Nice lingering finish to it. And then some of that char is kind of present there as well. Definitely, indicates the age on this one. Let's go and get into the last sip, guys. Cheers. The Sherwood was definitely a very interesting rye whiskey. It actually offered a lot of flavors that I hadn't picked up in some ryes in a very long time. Again, a lot of that toffee, that espresso coffee bean note there on the middle of the palate and into the finish. Again, with some of that that lingering char and oak, a little bit of black pepper, that mild kind of subtle notes of fruit there on the front of the palate. Definitely a fan of the Sherwood release. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into the Sherbrook Straight Rye Whiskey. This one comes in at 109.7 proof. Again, is 95.5 MGP. It was aged for 12 years in Indiana and 2 years in Baltimore, Maryland. Let's go ahead and get into the nose. So to me, this one is like way spicier on the nose. You do get, you still get some of that lemon, some of that orange, some of that citrus there. But then further into the glass, you start to pick up like a hint of clove, and then definitely some brown sugars are present there on this one. This one's definitely a little spicier, maybe a little bit sweeter and more inviting on the nose. So again, further into the glass, I do start to pick up a little hint of like some dark chocolate, and then there is definitely some maple syrup present further into the glass. Further away from the glass, there is some of that fruitiness. The citrus you do pick up definitely a little bit further away from the glass. Again, like the previous one, like the darker notes do start to appear further into the glass. That maple syrup, the brown sugars that are in there. Let's get into the palate, guys. Cheers. So this one just reminds me of like a very sweet piece of candy, almost like a sweet tart. Slight hint of floral there into the back of the palate. There's definitely some brown sugars though. It's sweet, not very spicy. Again, it's only coming in 109 proof. Definitely sweet there on the front of the palate, and then kind of slightly floral there on the back of the palate. Do pick up some citrus there on the sides, not overly dominating some of the other flavors. Definitely a really nice kind of caramel note that sits there on the center of the palate and just kind of sits. Very, very sweet. Getting the last sip. Cheers. So again, still very sweet on the front of the palate. A little bit of citrus there, some lemon, some orange there on the sides of the palate. You do start to pick up a very small hint of clove, but that look kind of like sweet tart note still kind of sits there. Definitely some brown sugars and again just a slight hint of maple syrup there on the back of the palate. I got more maple on the nose than I did on the palate on this one. But then again, this one's like very sweet up front, and then again starting to pick up some of those darker notes, and then a slight hint of floral there, which is very interesting on the back. So I like the Sherbrook as well. I think it offered a very nice viscosity to it. It was very different from the Sherwood. I feel like this one was way more sweet up front, nice kind of like sweet tart. Flavor to it there up front, and then into the back is when you start to pick up some of those brown sugars and some of that maple, slight undertones of some fruit. The rye spices I feel maybe weren't like as heavy, but they were still present. I did like the viscosity on this one, though. I feel like this one maybe he was a little more viscous than the one before. But yeah, overall, again, I'm definitely a big fan of this one here. All right, so lastly, we're going to go ahead and get into the Mount Vernon. Now, this one comes in at 108.2 proof. Again, it's aged 14 years. It's aged 12 years in Indiana, 2 years in Baltimore, Maryland. This is an MGP rye, 95% rye, 5% malted barley. Let's go ahead and get into the nose. So this one almost has a mixture of like what the other two had. It's not as sweet on the nose, but you do pick up a little bit of that brown sugar, a slight hint of that coffee espresso bean. I do pick up a little bit of orange more than I do the lemon. Also a slight, like further into the glass, I do pick up some of the sweetness of like a butterscotch, along with some of that sweet oak as well. Again, indicating that there's, that 14 year is actually coming into play. Yeah, the citrus, again, more of that orange, that butterscotch, slight hint of some sweet oak in there, and then again a very little bit of that like espresso coffee bean to this one. Not as much as the first one, but it's definitely there. Let's get into the palate. Cheers. So this one is very different for me. This one comes off very different from the first two. So this is like very kind of spicy up front, and then the middle of the palate gets sweet. So like on the front of the palate, there's like some black pepper, there's some allspice, and then on the middle of the palate is where it kind of starts to get sweet. You pick up some of those caramels, very, very small hint of some butterscotch there on the center of the palate. And then into the finish, it's not as spicy. It doesn't hit you with a strong like rye spice, but it kind of maintains that consistency, that sweetness that kind of flows through, which is very different for me. It's almost reversed from the last two. Let's get into the last sip. Cheers. So on the front of the palate again, there's definitely some of that rye, that spicy, that it's. Some allspice. There's definitely some black pepper there, and then in the middle of the palate again, it gets sweet. There's like a little bit of maple syrup, a slight hint of like a butterscotch, and then to the back you get like this black tea, ginger, like a slight hint of ginger note there that kind of flows down like from the back of the palate and into the finish. Yeah, very, very interesting how this one kind of flipped. Very different from the last two. This one again, just it's spicy up front, and then very sweet as it flows through all the way into the back. Really nice tasting notes here on this Mount Vernon Straight Rye whiskey. So I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode of Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. And again, I want to send a big thank you over to Christopher David, who supplied me with these samples here to review on the channel. So guys, as far as my favorite, I would honestly say that Mount Vernon was probably my favorite. I think it was very different from the other two. I can't say I've never, but I haven't in a long time had a rye whiskey that kind of flipped the spiciness and the sweetness on the palate. Most of the time, you do get that spiciness that kind of sits on the mid palate and goes into the finish. For some reason, this one was very spicy up front, and then it got very sweet and savory on the mid and back of the palate. So Mount Vernon, again, I feel was like my favorite. And then the Sherwood, I feel, was probably my second. Again, I really like the flavors that were on there. Again, some of that maple, and then it's just, there's some of these flavors that you don't typically pick up from a rye whiskey, let alone a high-aged MGP rye whiskey. I mean, they did a great job with blending these barrels to come up with these three different, Maryland Heritage Series blends. And then again, lastly, I think the Sherbrook for me was probably my last. It's not that I didn't enjoy it, but I enjoyed the other two more than I did the Sherbrook. But again, guys, these are great releases, great, high-age MGP releases. As far as the price points on them, that's a pretty steep price to pay for some 14-year MGP whiskey. I'm not saying that I wouldn't pay for it. I would definitely have to make that decision, but I would definitely, in my opinion, buy the Mount Vernon for sure. And I can't remember which one it was, but one of the other two was $270, if I'm not mistaken. But for me, I mean, I do feel like I would purchase the Mount Vernon over the other two. I feel like this one was more balanced. Again, it had really everything you kind of want in a high-age 95.5 rye. So again, guys, this is the Maryland Heritage release. Again, big shout out to Christopher David for supplying me with the samples to review on the channel. So guys, if you're looking for more reviews like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, bell notification to be alerted of any upcoming reviews or live streams. You can also find me on Instagram at Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. Until next time, guys, stay dusty.